Another deadline day, another ultimatum, another surprise turn from the U.S. president, the same Donald Trump who may or may not send ground troops to try and secure the Strait of Hormuz, now affirming that his administration talked over the weekend, over 2 days with the Iranians, thus holding off on hitting critical infrastructure. Trump's messaging since the start 24 days ago, keeping both friends and foes alike on their toes. That's in stark contrast to his Israeli allies, who in words and deeds seem to be clear, embracing a fight many of its leaders have been dreaming of for decades. Israel, too, has a larger-than-life populist leader who's changed the course of his country's history. Their interests overlap, but they remain distinct. Case in point, Israel's rush to prepare for an eventual ground operation in Lebanon. So which one's calling the shots, Trump or Benjamin Netanyahu? Whose idea was this war? And who takes the blame once the guns go silent on a campaign that has failed to rally traditional allies, one that's punished civilians by laying waste to critical infrastructure, and that's triggered a worldwide energy crisis? What prospects then for Trump, his MAGA movement, Netanyahu, and what prospects for the state of Israel going forward? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking, whose war is it? With us from Jerusalem, France 24 correspondent Noga Tarnapovsky. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, Francois.
Franco-Israeli journalist Gil Mihaly is editor-in-chief of Causeur, the news website. Thanks for joining us as well.
Most welcome.
Former U.S. Deputy Assistant Defense Secretary for Europe and NATO Policy, Jim Townsend. How are you, sir?
Great to be here. Thank you.
And from New York, Adam Weinstein, Deputy Director of the Middle East Program at the Quincy Institute's think tank. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
On the go, you can listen to the show wherever podcasts are streamed. Yeah, it started as a grim Monday morning in Tehran. We can show images of one man rescued from the rubble of a building struck by airstrikes. These images put out by the Iranian Red Crescent. Residents of the capital contending with power cuts, the targeting of critical infrastructure from the skies. Of course, internet blackouts as well from the regime itself. This before the surprise announcement from the President of the United States.
Tomorrow morning, sometime, their time, we were expected to blow up their largest electric generating plants that cost over $10 billion to build. It's a very good one. There was no dearth of money. And one shot, it's gone. It collapses. Why would they want that? So they called. I didn't call. They called. They want to make a deal. And we are very willing to make a deal. It's got to be a good deal. And it's got to be no more wars, no more nuclear weapons.
Noga Tarnapovsky, of course, the Iranians quick to say that they did not make the phone call. But there's a bit of a semantic game here, because maybe there have not been direct talks between Donald Trump and the Speaker of Iran's parliament, Mohammad Bagaf Kalibaf. But several news outlets are reporting that there are negotiations, perhaps initiated by Turkey. Egypt's in the mix, spearheaded by Pakistan, whose chief of military chief spoke on the phone with Donald Trump on Sunday. It appears as though the negotiations are real.
It does appear that at least some kind of communication is underway. We should also remember that Pakistan itself is a nuclear country, an Islamic country, and at the time that it became a nuclear military powerhouse, it was really considered by the Western world to be close to a disaster. So Pakistan is a country with very mixed interests here, certainly an interest in a rapprochement with the United States, in getting on in Donald Trump's good books, but also a country that wants to defend the right of even Islamic regimes to have nuclear weapons.
It's been Donald Trump's later stating as well that it's going to be 5 days extension of that ultimatum. In the meantime, we're getting reports of all kinds of back-channel talks taking place.
We are. I should tell you, Francois, that here in Jerusalem, the Israeli leadership was really caught by surprise. They were absolutely not expecting this kind of an unequivocal statement from Donald Trump, even though they also were aware of something in the background. I think here in Jerusalem, there was an assumption that Turkey was trying to mediate in some way. But the Israeli government is still really scrambling to respond to this. And among other things, having the rug pulled out from under him in this way is bad for Netanyahu, even if he manages to turn things around somehow. But the framing for now makes Netanyahu look almost irrelevant to Donald Trump's consideration. So while in the United States there are, wild rumors and conspiracies about Netanyahu driving this war, and while historically in some ways it is Netanyahu's war, here in Israel, more and more the sense is that Israel is just being used as a puppet. And I should add that one of Netanyahu's I would say, most loyal media mouthpieces tonight, Amit Segal, described the mood here in Jerusalem as, quote, cautious pessimism. In other words, Israel is not sure about what's happening, but they fear that Donald Trump really is walking towards a deal with Iran.
We've had Adam Weinstein in the last hour, the Axios news site, saying that the Israeli Prime Minister has been on the telephone with the U.S. Vice President, J.D. Vance, who's viewed as more of an isolationist. Is anything to make of that?
I don't think it's fair to call him an isolationist, but he has been critical of engaging in these kinds of regime change wars in the Middle East. And it's clear that the Trump administration doesn't have a well-defined end state for Iran, whereas Israel, on the other hand, I think has every incentive to continue this war and is willing to absorb a lot of pain to get rid of the Iranian regime as we know it.
And were you caught by surprise by this announcement by Donald Trump?
Well, yes, I was, because it appears to be an about face, although that's become commonplace with the Trump administration. And, these things tend to be fickle. What he says today might change in 12 hours or 24 hours, but I was surprised. But if you look at the bigger picture, it's not that surprising because, again, the Trump administration doesn't have a clear, well-defined end goal for Iran. And I think they've been quite surprised at the level of resistance that the Iranians have hit back with. And so I think they're concerned about the economic implications and political implications for themselves if this war drags on.
Jim Townsend, was the Pentagon surprised, do you think? Because, in the buildup, we had 2 aircraft carriers, we had the list of all these this military hardware that's been put in place, 40,000 troops more on the way coming from the Far East. Is the Pentagon surprised by the resistance put up by Iran?
I don't think the Pentagon was, because, the Pentagon itself, the military guys there, those that have been in the Central Command, they've been deployed there. We've been dealing with Iran for years and years and years and years. And so I don't think there's a lot that surprises them in terms of what Iran might do or not. What surprises them is what Trump does. I'm sure they were planning and getting ready for options to use those ground troops somewhere, Carg Island or something along those lines. They were putting together plans to do the escorting of tankers. They were looking at that military picture. And I'm sure they felt that's where they were going. And so when Trump made this announcement about these talks going on and this type of thing, I think they were surprised about that.
When you heard this report of a fire aboard one of those 2 aircraft carriers, the USS Gerald Ford, is there a question of this all hinges on not much?
Well, the fire and other troubles that some of those carriers have had out there is something that is really frustrating, I'm sure, for the Navy. And they're going to have to pull the Ford and do maintenance on it. So it's not like they are beginning to pull forces away. There's going to be a carrier, I think, getting underway to go take its place. So I think we're going to maintain the troops and the ships that are out there. But it's something where I think the military is probably very hesitant to assume anything because on the political side, it changes so fast.
Let's talk about the political side, Gil Mihaly. Before we talk about Israel, can the United States declare victory and pull out?
In theory, yes. I think we should frame the whole situation as a kind of a Cold War between the United States and Israel on the one side and Iran on the other side. So during the Cold War, you had periods of hot war, quite short. You had diplomacy, you had sanctions, you had covert operations. So I think that the objective of the Cold War between Israel and the United States and Iran are quite clear. There's an understanding that this regime cannot change its nature, and that the ultimate cause, the ultimate objective is to see a change. We need to call it a change of policy, but in this case, change of policy means also change of regime. Like in the Cold War,
which Israel states and the United States does not.
So what's happening now is that there is a phase of high intensity conflict. If you're lucky, the regime will change at the end of this phase, but it's not very important if it doesn't, because it will cost him in months and years of life later. This regime is condemned. It's like someone who has cancer and he's in terminal situation. It could take a couple of weeks, it could take a year and a half. Now they were hit very badly. They lost the Arab countries. There was Qatar, there was Turkey. There were countries who say they are moderates. They are not only pragmatics. And the difference, we know the difference between a pragmatic and a moderate. We can do business with them. Now they treat Iran like a dog with rabies. I mean, you need to kill him. I mean, it's impossible. And this is a strategic defeat of a magnitude you cannot imagine. Iran is alone. The decapitation of the regime pushed forward the most radicals. So the face they are showing, the decision they made, they fired missiles at Cyprus, they fired missiles at Turkey, they fired a missile for 4,000 kilometers. They did everything to spoil the diplomatic card. What they were supposed to do is make petrol expensive, to make pressure, to put pressure on the governments, and then spare Qatar, spare Turkey, not show that you have missiles for more than 2,000 kilometers. And they did the contrary. So you have a suicidal regime. You have the last people who are willing to do business with them. They say, it's over.
Okay, but in the long run, is there
This is the long run.
In the long run, is there more resentment towards Iran or towards Israel? Which, if you're Qatar, for instance, when Israel hit that joint gas field, that natural gas field that's jointly managed by Iran and Qatar.
Resentment is not very important. They need to get rid of the regime. Who will help them do it? Russia? No. China? No. Who's left? What is Qatar? Qatar is 350,000 people with 2 million people who work for them. What are they going to do? If they understand that they can't do business with Iran, even though they thought for 30 years that, yes, there is a phone number there, we can do business with them. Now they decided it's not the case. Who will defend them? Even though they are very disappointed with the United States, they dislike Israel, okay, where can they shop other than Washington or Jerusalem?
Adam Weinstein, you agree?
First of all, your previous guest, I agree that Central Command probably has a more objective view of what might happen if we attacked Iran. The problem is there's not a very sophisticated interagency process in the Trump administration. And so I don't think they're necessarily listening to Central Command when they make these plans, and Central Command has to carry them out regardless. And remember, it's the Secretary Hegseth who's representing the Pentagon. I don't know if I need to say more on that. In terms of what the last guest said, we could spend the next 5 hours talking about missed opportunities by the Iranian regime. Fine. I think I agree with him that it's been a mistake for them to attack. They attacked Oman. I mean, it's been a huge mistake for them to attack those in the Gulf who had actually acted as mediators, who were willing to defend them on the world stage. That being said, I think we have to keep some context here, which is that they were in the middle of negotiations in summer when the Trump administration bombed them. There was a deal on the table brokered by the Omanis when this last round of attacks happened and the United States assassinated the supreme leader. So, at least in recent times, I think it's been the Trump administration that has sabotaged diplomacy with the help of Israel. Are the Iranians acting 100% rationally in terms of how they've responded? No, I think they've gone for maximum pain, and they haven't done it in necessarily the most strategic way. But I do think we have to keep that within the broader context that the Trump administration itself squandered some potential avenues for diplomacy. And if we go way back, remember, they left it to JCPOA and they assassinated Qasem Soleimani. These are not necessarily, regardless of where you think of Qasem Soleimani, and I don't think he was a good actor in the Middle East, but these are not moves that advance diplomacy.
All right. At the same time, we see the maximum pain, including Israel, Iranian missiles evading its Iron Dome defenses over the weekend to land in two southern towns, including Dimona, injuring dozens on Saturday. Dimona, close to the site where Israel's suspected of housing its nuclear program. Prime Minister Netanyahu visited on Sunday. He vowed to stay the course.
Our world. And it's time to see the leaders of the rest of the countries join up. I'm happy to say that I can see some of them beginning to move in that direction, but more is needed. President Trump's call to have the international community confront this terrorist fanatic regime of zealots, that is a call not only for the security of America and the security of Israel, it's for the security of the entire world. And it's time for them to act. I think President Trump knows exactly what he's doing, and whatever we do together, and as far as possible in confidence.
I think President Trump knows exactly what he's doing. Noga Tarnapovsky, flattery will get Benjamin Netanyahu everywhere?
Look, it's unclear. I mean, despite having divergent interests in some ways, Donald Trump, thus far in his second term, has refrained from attacking Prime Minister Netanyahu. And to the contrary, he has gone to great lengths, even during this very active and dangerous moment of war, this month of war now, to demand from the Israeli president that he pardon Netanyahu. So he appears to be really interfering with internal Israeli judiciary matters on behalf of his pal. And yet, as we see, Netanyahu keeps being made a fool by Donald Trump. He puts out, these complimentary video clips every day praising Trump, announcing some other inventive prize that will be heaped upon Trump. And yet, as we saw today, Donald Trump does as Donald Trump wishes. I'm not even sure he mentioned Israel or Netanyahu in his initial remarks today before getting on Air Force One. I know that he subsequently said Israel will be happy with what he gets, but basically, the current predicament leaves Netanyahu in a very, very difficult place. And I'm sure that's why we haven't heard a word from him today.
We've seen the Reuters news agency in the past hour talking about how Trump and Netanyahu conferred before that February 28th strike that killed Ayatollah Khamenei. Who's playing who?
Well, that's a good question. It's something that you can make a case for either one. I mean, there's in the U.S., online and in the press, there's a lot of speculation that it's Netanyahu who is playing Trump, and that Trump is being manipulated not just by Putin, but by Netanyahu. Netanyahu keeping him in the dark about Israeli strikes, Netanyahu having his own playbook about what he wants out of this war, that there's a disconnect, that they're splitting off. So it is very difficult to answer that question, who's playing whom. I think they're both pursuing what they want to do, and they're trying not to get in the way of the other.
Gil Mihaly?
Well, if we go back to the context of a Cold War that is going on for 40 years, and during which there was, for example, the Stuxnet operation, the virus. This is a multi-billion operation that takes years. That decisions are made by presidents, and it takes years to carry out.
This was this virus that the Israelis.
2006, 2010. It was an American-Israeli operation with a lot of American input and money. If you see all
it was a big cyber attack against Iran.
Yes. If you see the capabilities of the Israeli Air Force that were deployed, this is something that Israel and the United States are building together for at least 20 years with more than a vague objective in mind. So, you just ask Zelensky how it is to fight a war with a coalition, or you ask Churchill or de Gaulle. I mean, when I was young, they used to say that the best thing for peace is to fight in a coalition because you start liking the enemy. So, I mean, and part of the role of the junior partner in the coalition is that when Israel is bombing something and then Trump said, it was a mistake, he said, I didn't know about it. They did it. I mean, they did it. So it's part of Israel's role.
So you're saying there's a symbiosis between the two, between Trump and Netanyahu.
There's a version of good cop, bad cop. I don't think that something that is going on for 40 years, it's not about parties, it's not about this or that president. What we see wasn't prepared in 48 hours. It wasn't prepared under Trump. It wasn't prepared under Obama. I mean, it goes back to Bush, even maybe Clinton. So we have something which is huge, big, and of course there are always tensions. I mean, we have a specialist, someone who worked in the diplomatic side of defense. You know that even though you work in alliance and you see things globally the same way, your day-to-day business is usually a bit of a conflict, and people change their mind, and you work something out, and then there's election. I mean, this is the reality. So we shouldn't. We always have to keep the big picture in mind all the time.
Adam Weinstein, you agree there's a kind of a symbiosis, and this makes sense? They saw a window of opportunity, and together they made the decision, or did one play the other?
I think there's a degree of symbiosis. I do agree with that good cop, bad cop analogy. I think at least President Trump tries to do that. Although I think if you look at interests, I think the way this war has been executed has been advances Israel's interests more than it advances the United States' interests. I mean, I can understand why the Israelis view the destruction of the Iranian regime as a vital interest for themselves. I don't think that's a vital interest for the United States. And I think, ironically, I think the United States would have advanced Israel's safety if it had remained in the JCPOA for one, and pursued diplomacy with Iran more vigorously. Number two, and most importantly, it would have advanced U.S. interests. But I do agree there's a symbiosis. I don't think it's fair to take away agency from the Trump administration and simply say that they were tricked into doing this. I think they chose to do this.
All right, Noga Tarnapovsky, we saw reporting from the New York Times in the last 24 hours talking about questions over the head of intelligence in Israel and the information that he's been feeding. When you look at that, what to make of it? Has this been carefully scripted and they were just waiting for a window of opportunity, or is there improvisation?
Francois, before I answer your question, I just want to say that Prime Minister Netanyahu just did put out a statement while you were speaking with the other guests. He said that he has spoken with President Trump, and he said that no matter what happens, Israel will protect its own interests. So a rather terse statement from Prime Minister Netanyahu there, but again, underscoring, as he always tries to do, his closeness with Trump, his ability to reach the American president just with a phone call. Regarding this report that we saw today in the New York Times, it was fascinating, in my opinion, for many reasons. The New York Times report was attempting to discuss what was the thinking ahead of this war. And yet it was basically an article about blame game. And so what we see are narratives already being built as if the war were already over. And this was several hours before Donald Trump's statement. So one of the narratives coming together in the United States very impermeably, I'd say, is that Israel did drag the United States into this war, that Israel was responsible at least for twisting Donald Trump's ears. Maybe a kind of more damaging way of saying something that we all know to be true, which is that Prime Minister Netanyahu has really a remarkable talent for knowing how to frame things in such a way that Donald Trump hears them well. But in the next line, what we saw was the Israeli blame game. So from Israeli sources, we see that the person who is being scapegoated for making a wrong decision, for telling Benjamin Netanyahu, who then told Donald Trump that the Iranian people would flood the streets and overthrow their own regime, the man being blamed for this is David Barnea, the current head of the Mossad, really with arrows pointed directly at him. And we saw that the Prime Minister of Israel is depicted as he depicted himself after October 7th. In other words, as something of a hapless leader in the hands of intel officers giving him bad information. So I don't know how many Israelis read the New York Times, but the depiction of him really is identical to the one of the Prime Minister who failed to foresee October 7th.
Is this the plan if things go awry? Blame the head of Mossad, Gil Meili?
Yeah, probably. It was quite discussed in Israel. Ronan Bergman, the correspondent of the New
York Times, yeah.
New York Times in Israel, talked about it. Yes, it could be the beginning of a blame game between the two governments. Could be. Could be someone already knew that things are, if it's not the end, it may be the beginning of the end. So this is the time to start shaping the narrative. And it could be also in the Israeli side, in the Israeli game, that Netanyahu is preparing the narrative because there are going to be elections, not later than November. And we know that after the 12 days war, Netanyahu's popularity didn't benefit.
This was last June when they hit Iran's nuclear
It was last
facilities.
June, and 2-3 weeks after the war, things politically went back to what they were before the 12 days war. So it's always like that. During war, we are very excited, and things happen very quickly, and the stakes are high. And then a month later, it becomes a blur for everyone.
Yeah, and again, in your previous life, Jim Townsend, you were at the intersection of the technical military matters and the politics of it all. And so you kind of prepare who takes the blame, especially because there's no good way to retreat or to raise a white flag, is there?
Well, you always blame the intel people. That's standard. So the Mossad guy getting the blame, I mean, that's what one would expect. But, it's really interesting, the narrative and how this narrative is starting to be debated back and forth. When it's not even, for me, it's the end of the beginning. We've still got a lot more to go with those troops heading over. But, there's Israeli elections and there's also U.S. elections, too. So Trump cares very much about what this narrative is going to look like. So it's not just the price of oil and gasoline he's worried about. He's worried about how this is going to be covered in the press. So he's got to juggle a lot of things in terms of how he's coming across and the timing of it. And the midterms are right around the corner. And if he's got a military idea of putting troops on the ground, that's going to take a long time to set up. That's not something that's going to happen as soon as those troops arrive. So his game right now, it could be he could be setting himself up for a long game, but he's got a short game when it comes to the elections. So this is going to be putting him in a difficult position.
So hang on, are you saying because there were talks that took place, and it was between round of talks back in June that the Israelis and then the U.S. hit Iran, and then this time same thing. There was supposed to be a new round of talks in Geneva, and in between those rounds, February the 28th happened. Are you suggesting perhaps that if they're now talking about talks, it's to give more time for the ground troops?
Could be. They're talking about talks. We know that in terms of talks, Trump can blow either way. I mean, we saw with Putin and Ukraine, talking about making progress and every now and then making some type of demand of Putin. He uses this to gain time or to, he's got this strategy in his mind of how he's going to approach it. This time around with these talks, if these talks aren't going anywhere, he doesn't have a lot of time to let it play out because those elections are around the corner. And when these troops arrive, if he's planning on using them on the ground to take Carg Island or do something on the Straits, there's a lot of things that have to come with those troops. Logistics, there's got to be air cover, there's got to be a pre-invasion, operation done before the troops even get there. So he's in a real bind when it comes to the timing of things. He doesn't have a lot of time because of the elections, and he doesn't have a lot of time because of the time needed for these troops. So the talks had better come to fruition. If they don't, he's going to have to come up with something, and it might be on the ground, so that he doesn't look bad for the election. And those are the elements he's got to play with.
Adam Weinstein, when this morning began, digesting all of the weekend's analysis from high minds who know this stuff, they were all saying there's very few exit ramps for Donald Trump. Are there more exit ramps this evening than there were this morning?
Well, look, I think there's always an exit ramp. I mean, it depends what kind of deal they're going to get from the exit ramp and how long lasting that deal is. One of the, I think, weaknesses of the Trump administration's approach to diplomacy is it doesn't have the patience for diplomacy. And so it tries to rush through diplomacy. It likes to have high-level meetings and this and that and leak diplomatic and create new multilateral groups about diplomacy. But the Trump administration hasn't demonstrated either in the first administration or the second one that it has the patience for the kind of detailed deal making that is required to make a deal that's sustainable. But of course, there's exit ramps, and I think one of the big risks for Trump and the Republicans politically is that they're going to own this conflict. And remember, he campaigned on not getting the U.S. Into new quagmires in the Middle East, and certainly to ordinary Americans, this looks like a quagmire, regardless of what the policy community has to say about it.
The U.S. fearing a quagmire. Israel looking north this Monday, hitting another bridge on Lebanon's Litani River, this one cutting off a main link between the southern city of Nabtieh and the Al-Hujr Valley. That's on top of the one on Sunday near the port city of Tyre. With a troop and tank buildup at the border, Israel certainly getting its ducks in order for an occupation of a buffer zone inside of Lebanon, again, south of the Litani, to protect residents of the north of Israel. You were describing, Noga Tarnapovsky, an element of caution, even shock inside of Israel this Monday. Are Israelis really hell-bent on occupying southern Lebanon?
I don't think Israelis are hell-bent on occupying southern Lebanon. In fact, this is in some ways the third Lebanon war for Israelis, who paid a huge price for the two previous Lebanon wars, one in the early 2000s, one a decade before that. So I think there's very little appetite for that. On the other hand, the truth is that life in northern Israel right now is unlivable. Simply unlivable. The mayor of the city of Kiryat Shmona, up in the north of the Galilee, today begged the government for a formal evacuation order. He said people are being left to their deaths, that anyone who couldn't leave the city under their own power has been just abandoned by the government. And this touches on Netanyahu's political weakness. His decision at the end of 2023 to evacuate the entire north of Israel, a third of the country basically being declared uninhabitable by its own government, was eventually understood to be a huge political mistake. And so now, even though people are really getting pounded and battered, both by Hezbollah and by Iran, he doesn't have it in him. And that is causing many Israelis not to call necessarily for an occupation of southern Lebanon, like the finance minister did, but calling for a way to end this conflict with Hezbollah. So lots of talk in Israel about, is there any possibility of bringing France in to impose the ceasefire deal of November 2024, under which Hezbollah should have left southern Lebanon and disarmed? A lot of questions about whether Donald Trump will at any point pipe up. But for now, as you said, with no external forces really exerting much pressure, what we're seeing is the Israeli army preparing for at least many weeks of battle and maybe even an occupation of southern Lebanon.
An occupation of southern Lebanon. You heard Noga Tarnapovsky there, Gil Mihaly, talking about how Israelis are war weary, and yet if that election were held tomorrow, there's a good chance Benjamin Netanyahu could win re-election, right? Could stay on as prime minister of Israel. So he keeps getting re-elected.
We're not talking about the same time frame. In May of 2000, Ehud Barak, prime minister, decided a retreat, unilateral retreat from Lebanon. It was considered a defeat, and Hezbollah was very proud. The Syrians were very happy. The Arabs were very happy. The idea was to deprive Hezbollah of its source of legitimacy. So Israel took what was seen as a military defeat in order to inject poison into the Lebanese perverse system of an Iran putting its proxy inside a dying political body. And 26 years later, even though there was the failure of the war of 2006, and again, they were happy, they were crying victory, the fact that Israel used force, violence on one side, with a political agenda, deprive them of legitimacy, let the political core, the political body in Lebanon, little by little, reject Hezbollah. Just before the war, the government declared that they don't want to make war on Israel. When Hezbollah fired, the government put Hezbollah outside of the law. This is what's important. Whatever Israel does, if they destroy 5 buildings, if they make a mistake here, if they make a mistake, doesn't matter. Look at the 26 years, look where it's going. The body politic in Lebanon is getting stronger and stronger. It might take 40 years like the Cold War. Hezbollah is deprived of Iranian help. Hezbollah is losing assets and men. And if people are looking for a clear victory like 6 days war, it's over.
All right, so
it might take some more time, but what started in 2000, in May 2000, will end with the dissolution of Hezbollah as a state inside the state of Lebanon.
Adam Weinstein, does it end with another occupation of southern Lebanon, or does it end perhaps well with a normalization of ties between Israel and a rejuvenated Lebanese state?
I think we're very far away from restoration of ties between Lebanon and Israel, but I could be proven wrong, and I'm not I'm not an expert in Lebanese politics. I do think an occupation is possible for the simple reason that I think Israel sees this as a once-in-a-generation opportunity to disarm Hezbollah. I think the real question is what's left of Hezbollah. I agree with the other guests that Hezbollah's era of being a state within a state, it has largely already come to an end, but are they going to remain a militia within a state that can have a distortionary effect on Lebanese politics? I don't know. I mean, what do we mean when we say disarming Hezbollah? Does it mean taking away their heavy weapons, or does it mean taking away their AK-47s? I think Hezbollah will remain a force and spoiler within Lebanese politics for some time to come, even though it's been greatly degraded.
And obviously it's the question that's been put, the same has been put with Iran. Surviving is a victory, some say.
No, that's exactly right, and that's very true for Iran. And we've seen this throughout history, where whether it's the North Vietnamese, whether it's other opponents that the U.S. has had to deal with, all they needed to do was to survive and to make it hard on the U.S. To make it so that the American military might win battles, but ultimately loses the war. Afghanistan is an example of that. So for Iran, that's the playbook.
Can Israel then win on the battlefield, both with Iran and with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and lose its sympathy on the eve of the start of the war with Iran? The polling agency Gallup published a survey that for the first time ever in the United States showed sympathies had shifted. 41% of Americans said they now sympathize more with the Palestinians in the Middle East, 36 with the Israelis. Last Tuesday, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee lobbying group, also known as AIPAC, spent a reported $22 million supporting pro-Israel candidates in the Illinois Democratic primary elections. They had mixed results. Some of the candidates they backed won, others lost. Illinois' Jewish governor, J.B. Pritzker, who harbors presidential ambitions. Listen to as he distanced himself from AIPAC.
I walked away from AIPAC about a dozen years ago because they really became a very different organization. Instead of a bipartisan organization that was doing what was best for peace in the Middle East, what was best for the U.S.-Israel relationship, they became an organization that was supporting Donald Trump and people who follow Donald Trump.
Now, of course, it's easy for J.B. Pritzker, he's a billionaire, to distance himself from AIPAC. He doesn't need their money for his re-election campaign as governor. But still, is this significant? Is this the beginning of the end of the influence of AIPAC?
Well, that's a great question. And believe it, AIPAC has had quite an influence in Washington, as well as across the United States. But in the Washington corridors, they're very powerful, or have been. But I think this is the beginning of what we're going to see in the American body politic among young people, is that there's going to be much more of a feeling about the Palestinians and the Palestinian cause. Israel is going to be looked upon as an aggressor, despite the terrorist incident that happened, that kicked off this whole round of warfare. Despite that, I think for a lot of American young people, that's not the message that they're getting. The message they're getting is, look at the brutality, look at the loss of life of children and women. That's the image in a lot of the young people today. So it's going to begin there, and we'll see where it goes.
Adam Weinstein, is it reversible or not, this loss of popularity for Israel in the United States?
Well, look, a lot of AIPAC's messaging and Israel's messaging about this war requires, 70 years of history that they want you to review. But then young people look at images out of Gaza and a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I think in the world of lobbying, we're in an era now where an Instagram reel or a TikTok from some random person actually can, have 200,000 likes and millions of views and is able to compete with some of these lobbying efforts that cost a lot of money. I think the view of young Americans about Israel has changed dramatically, and I don't even need to see the polling to know that. But I think again a more important question is, where do Americans prioritize it? Are they going to vote based on that? Some people wouldn't vote in the last election because of that, but we're going to have to see going forward. How does it influence people's actual behavior, or does it remain something that's online? Whether it's reversible, that's potentially true, but not under the current Israeli leadership.
All right, we'll have to unfortunately leave it there. I want to thank you, Adam Weinstein, for joining us from New York, Noga Tarnapovsky in Jerusalem, Gil Mihaly. I want to thank as well Jim Townsend. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.